Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Robert guffawed as he watched Tyrion Lannister get punched by Maggie Mormont square on his jaw. His wife's nuncle had boldly put his hand where it was not welcome and got a bloody nose for his trouble. Take that, you bloody southern. Next time you try something like that, I'll have you swallow your balls after I cut them off. Robert could hear the she-bear threaten the youngest sibling of Tywin fucking Lannister, and that made him laugh hard. He was not the only one. The strong and sturdy Great Jon was also roaring out his approval. He always found it fascinating that the Mormonts were allowed to do as they do in the north. As far as he knows, the Mormonts are the only house that allows their women the freedom to pursue a martial lifestyle in the Seven Kingdoms. Except for Dorne, those desert dwellers must have gone mad with living in scorching heat for so long. Maybe this was the case for the Northerners as well, seeing as they have been living in bone-chilling cold for centuries. For whatever reason, only the Bear Islands seems to be comfortable with sending their women into war. It seems the Northern Bears are more ferocious than the lions of the West, Robert said amusedly as Tyrion Lannister sat back down, rubbing his reddening nose. "She's just unfamiliar with us lions," said Tyrion, waving away at the servants, trying to treat his nose. Robert liked the man. Out of all the Lannisters, he thought Tyrion Lannister is the only one with a likable personality. The rest of them were greedy lickspittles looking to hoard power and influence in his court. "Here, drink this." Robert offered a chalice full of wine to his wife's uncle. "It is a strong batch of Dornish red. It should dull your pain and your embarrassment." Robert smirked and laughed uproaringly as Tyrion drained the chalice in one go rather than the usual uppity style these blonde-haired cunts portray. Case in point, his wife was a marvel when it comes to drinking wine in a sophisticated way. That was the only time his wife managed to excite him a bit. Most of the time, her stellar personality drained him of any feelings for that shrew of a woman. Cersei, when she opens her mouth, always demands something from him. She also thinks that she and her family is the Seven's gift to the world, and everyone should treat them as such, which made his skin crawl. At least there are a few good apples in the colossal tree that is House Lannister, Robert thought, eyeing Tyrion Lannister. A man who can hold his ground while filling half his belly with one of the strongest wines is trustworthy in Robert's eyes. "Don't you think you have drunk enough, your grace?" asked Eddard, disapproval shining out from the Warden of the North's gray eyes. You know me, Ned. I'm only 3 pitchers in and I can go further," said Robert, draining a cup full of wine. "Besides, there is nothing to do here until Stannis arrives with my fleet." "Come join us, Lord Stark. In this world, you've got to enjoy life as much as you can, cause happiness is fleeting," said Tyrion Lannister. "What he said Robert, raising his wine cup in salute. "Come sit by my side and stop calling me your grace all the time. We are no longer little boys running around the Eyrie pretending to be knights." "Robert, you are the king," Eddard reminded. Even so, he took a seat to Robert's right. "Don't you remind me of that Ned. If I had my way, I'd be traveling across Essos cracking skulls rather than sitting on that pointy chair all day long listening to whiny courtiers." Robert growled, thinking of the shit-stained capital, and his bitchy wife. Thinking about that made him drink 2 more cups of wine in quick succession. Robert considered himself a simple man. He has very few likes and was mostly happy with his lot. He loved to drink wine and fuck any wenches he could get his hands on. There was also his recent hobby of crushing skulls of men underneath his warhammer. He would have balked at killing a few years back, but ever since the rebellion, he loved killing people. Each time he swung his hammer, he thought of that rapist inbred Ponce's chest caving in. This had let him sleep soundly at night, no matter how many lives he took. Killing, fucking, and drinking was also the only way to alleviate the guilt and loss he felt. He had fought a war that ravaged the 7 kingdoms to save his one true love, Lyanna Stark. At the end of the war, all that was left of her were bones and a few fond memories. Those inbred shits took his heart from him, and he would never forgive anyone with the Targaryen name. Perhaps he'd have forgiven Rhaella Targaryen's remaining 2 spawns if Lyanna had survived, but now he lived to see the last seeds of the dragons be wiped away from this world. Then he could rest easy and hand over the ruling of the kingdoms to Jon till his son came of age. Till then, he'd have to sit on that stupid chair. "Robert, remember your duty. If not for you, the entirety of 7 kingdoms will fall into a constant state of warfare," Eddard cautioned. Ha! You are like Jon, always talking about duty and honor. Robert waves away his friend's concerns. Jon is wise, said Eddard. On that, we can agree. This is why I left him in charge at the capital, said Robert. Enough talk about politics. What is this? I hear about your son making Valyrian steel swords. Yes, Lord Stark. Word is that your son made a full set of Valyrian steel armor and 2 swords in a single day. Is there any truth to such rumors? Asked Tyrion Lannister. I could speak all day on that issue, but I think it's better if I show you, said Eddard. A few moments later, Robert was marveling at the work of art before his eyes. He was standing inside Ned's tent, where the suit of armor made of Valyrian steel was on full display. The craftsmanship on the armor was beyond compare. Although the armor remained pitch black, he could see intricate patterns of wolf heads etched on the surface. The customary ripple pattern was also present, authenticating that the armor was indeed made of Valyrian steel. It has always been his dream to own a Valyrian steel sword. He preferred using a warhammer, but he knew there was none to be found. The only way he could get a Valyrian steel warhammer was by reforging Valyrian steel swords and daggers. He was no good in finances, but even he knew it'd be horrendously expensive to melt down Valyrian steel swords and daggers to make a full metal warhammer. Truth be told, he was incredibly jealous of Ned because he got to wield a Valyrian steel greatsword. But now, there is an opportunity before him to get a magnificent warhammer made of Valyrian steel. The good part is there will be no incest-ridden dragon spawn involved in making the Valyrian steel. The fact that a Stark of all people had unlocked the secrets behind Valyrian steel felt like another snub against those sister fuckers. For Robert, it felt like the gods, old and new, were finally in agreement to snub those dragon spawns by gifting the secrets of Valyrian steel to his friend's second son. But he was not the only one to be impressed by the work of art sitting inconspicuously before his eyes. Not since the fires of doom devoured Valyria has there ever been a new Valyrian steel artifact been made. This is a wondrous accomplishment, Lord Stark, said Tyrion Lannister, never taking his eyes off the armor. I had always wondered how the Valyrians managed to create Valyrian steel. The maesters say there was magic and dragon flame involved. Obviously, they were wrong. Or is there a hidden dragon in Winterfell? Lord Stark. Robert noticed a fearful look on his friend's face. Oh, come on, Ned. You don't have to fear those giant fire-breathing monsters. They are all dead, said Robert, shaking his head at how easily scared his friend was when dragons were involved. Robert knew his friend had a fear of fire ever since the Mad King had Rickard Stark murdered with wildfire. Perhaps that's why Ned looked frozen with fear, so he decided to cheer up the man away from darker memories. Tell you what, I find myself curious how your son accomplished this historic feat. After we crush these squids, I'll travel to Winterfell and see your son's work with my own eyes. Maybe I'll even have your son make me a weapon. Robert suggested, a wonderful idea, Your Grace. I've been planning to travel the 7 kingdoms. The North would be an exemplar place to start seeing as it hosts one of the oldest cultures in the known world, not to mention the Wall, said Tyrion. There you have it, Robert happily crowed. Once these iron-born bastards are beaten back and I have Bell and Greyjoy kneeling before me, we all go to Winterfell. Robert could feel giddy at the prospect of visiting Winterfell. There was no Jon Arryn to hold him back, and he could disappear into the wildlands of the frigid north without worrying about some random trouble surfacing in that shit-filled capital. He'd also be far away from his nagging wife, which is also something he looked forward to. In the past few days, despite being surrounded by members of his wife's family, he found himself enjoying being far away from his wife's reach. Robert, I don't think... Oh, shut up, Ned. I'm your king and I'm ordering you to prepare for my arrival in Winterfell, Robert ordered. It was one of his brightest moments to pull his position as king over his friend. He didn't like to lord over his position, but sometimes it helped. He was the king of the 7 kingdoms. The reluctant acquiescence from Ned was proof of this simple truth. It was good to be king. Winds howled as it blew across the snow-covered landscape, carrying sleet and bone-chilling cold. Harry could feel the chill in his bones, despite his fervent attempts to use his magic to ward off this horrible cold. Yet, his attempts were in vain. His magic remained unresponsive, and fear settled deep in his mind. Looking around, he was confused to note nothing remained in his line of sight, except for the snow. The high walls of Winterfell were nowhere to be seen. Even the bustling courtyard or the dark alleys of Wintertown were beyond his line of sight for some odd reason. As he waded through knee-deep snow, he was confused and angry. Outside of seeing an occasional tree covered in snow, the whole world looked like it got painted in white. Even the clouds were stark white. His arms were shaking uncontrollably, while his legs felt like they weighed a few tons. He was struggling to drag himself in this frozen hell. He found himself. After long hours of trek, he finally found a cliff. To get a better lay of the land, he waddled over towards the cliff while wrapping his cloak tighter. The closer he got to the cliff, the worse the cold became. At one point, he nearly fell over when his legs refused to budge, frozen by the cold. Somehow, he managed to put himself in a position where he could look down the cliff. Snow was everywhere, and the blizzard kept visibility very low. Harry suddenly frowned when he noticed something moving in the distance. He strained his eyes to get a better view, and all of a sudden the blizzard dwindled, clearing up obstructions to his vision. Harry nearly stumbled back as he looked at the large army of what seemed to be inferi gathered down below. All of them stopped moving, all of a sudden, and turned their crystal blue eyes towards his direction. For the first in a long time, he felt fear settling inside him. He tried so hard to use his magic out, but it refused to budge. Without his magic, he felt like he was crippled. "What is this?" he muttered in horror as he looked beyond the assembled inferi. In the far distance, he could see a sea of inferi marching down from a hill. There were thousands upon thousands of inferi, but that was not the worst part. There were giants, bears, lions, wolves, leopards, and many other creatures, all of them with matching blue eyes. All of a sudden, a raven flew towards him, which made him stumble back. The raven settled on a boulder and began crying, "Dead, dead, dead." Strangely enough, the raven had 3 eyes instead of 2. When he stared curiously into the raven's third eye on its forehead, everything went black. With a gasp, Harry jerked awake from his slumber with sweat rolling off his forehead. Letting out a breath of relief, he calmed down while eyeing the book on his bedside table. He had fallen asleep last night, heavily engrossed in the tales of the long night. No wonder he was dreaming about inferi, or as the first men called them, whites. "You were not dreaming, Harry Stark." The childlike voice shocked him, and he blanched when a small creature sitting in his open window came into his view. It had chestnut-colored skin, clawed hands with only 3 fingers and a thumb. The large yellow slitted eyes of the creature glowed ominously in the dark. While overall the creature had an ominous look, the flowers decorating its black hair gave it a sifter appearance. Not to mention, it was dressed in tree leaves and vines. "The children of forest?" he whispered. "That's what your ancestors called us, but we are far older than mankind could ever perceive. Men, they are the children, not us," the creature claimed as it jumped down from the window into his room's floor. "Our name in the true tongue means those who sing the song of the earth. For 10,000 years, we have sung the song of nature while your kind ravaged this world with cruelty, greed, and conflict." "Earth singers," Harry muttered, frowning in thought. He had come across their kind in the Amazon forests of Earth in his travels. "What's your name? Why are you here?" he asked, stepping out of his bed while discreetly summoning the Elder Wand into his hand. "You can speak the true tongue?" The druid sounded impressed. "I speak the tongue of noble serpents," he hissed back. "Voldemort may have been one right prick, but he was indebted to the Dark Lord for passing down the ability of parcel tongue on that fateful night. The ability had come in very handy in his travels across the world." The creature seemed to straighten up and gave him a waist-length bow. "Greetings, speaker. My name is Spring. I've come here to aid you, Harry Stark. The 3-eyed raven believes you to be the key to destroy the others." Harry rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and shook his head. "3-eyed who?" Lena remembered her daughter to be a spry little girl. She was always running around the streets of Wintertown, obsessed with flowers. Her daughter Menna was the light of her life. Her husband was a drunkard who brought little earnings to their family, and thus she raised her daughter solely on her earnings from working in the kitchens of Winterfell. Working for the Starks was not a bad thing. All things considered, she earned a steady sum of silver every month because of her position, and next to her earnings, her daughter had known only full bellies all her life. She was even allowed to bring her daughter inside the safety of Winterfell thanks to Lord Stark's kindnesses. For Mina, who lost her father to the rebellion and mother to a harsh winter, life was not so bad. Now that Lord Stark had marched the Northern Army south once more, her husband marched with the army, and that left Lena and her daughter all alone. While her husband Ben was a hopeless drunk, there were times Lena would wish his presence. This was one of those times, because her daughter has fallen ill. It was not just her daughter, though. A whole lot of other people in Wintertown has also fallen ill, and the numbers continue to steadily rise day by day. All of this started with the arrival of foreign merchants into their lands. Supposedly, these strange-looking foreigners were Braavosi merchants traveling from White Harbor with Lord Manderley. Foreigners rarely visited Winterfell, and it seemed this time these strange Essosi have brought death and disease with them. The Maester promised her dear Mina will recover, but she was not so sure. This was why she was carefully sneaking through the corridors leading to the only person whom she felt could save her daughter's life. Standing before the black-painted oak doors, Lena took a deep breath before knocking twice. The door swung open, after a moment, and she was immediately on her knees before Lord Stark's blessed son. She aired her grievances and wetted the boots of the little lord with her tears. It was a miracle that the guards never noticed what was happening, but she begged his help all the same. If the blessed Stark could not help her, she feared her dear Mina would never open her eyes. If that happens, there was no reason for her to remain amongst the living. So she earnestly begged the Stark, who was blessed by the old gods, to save her daughter. The spring sickness, many called it. Harry would have just called it the flu, mostly because there was no spring in the north. At least, it was not spring season when the sickness began to spread among the small folk of Wintertown. It was still snowing outside, so he was baffled why anyone would coin the term spring sickness. Strange names aside, it was undeniable that people were falling sick. Thankfully, the mortality rate seems to be keeping a low bar for the time being. The elderly were the most affected, as Wintertown was, for the moment, mostly inhabited by old men, women, and children. Many of the able-bodied men were away fighting the war. That doesn't mean there were younger victims falling prey to the spring sickness. The daughter of one of Winterfell's cooks falling ill is an example. Now, according to Maester Luwin, the spring sickness had once wreaked havoc in Westeros during the reign of Daeron II. The Great Spring Sickness, the Maesters called it. Mostly, it was a plague that struck almost all the major cities of Westeros. The worst affected was the capital city itself, King's Landing, where the Targaryen kings reigned. Despite strenuous efforts from the learned men of the Citadel, no cure was discovered to tackle the plague. The only good news is, the spring sickness gripping Wintertown is far less dangerous than the Great Spring Sickness of 29 AC. While the sickness had quickly spread amongst the small folk, it is not dangerous enough to kill people in one day. Although there are some cases of quick deaths, but Maester Luwin is of the opinion those people were far from healthy. To begin with, Harry suspected Maester Luwin was keeping the veracity of details surrounding the sickness and its danger from his mother. After all, she was expecting to deliver his sibling any day now. The last thing the Maester or anyone would want was to trouble the Lady of Winterfell with ill news. And this was also a reason for Harry to find a sure cure that can eradicate the infectious disease from spreading. He considered Lily Potter to be his birth mother, and yet he felt more emotionally attached to Catelyn Stark. Perhaps it was because Lily Potter has always been an idea for him. He never experienced or knew the person that was Lily Potter. He only knew her from accounts of others, and hence never experienced the relationship that ought to have blossomed between a son and mother. But now, things were different. His birth mother was heavily pregnant, and she is surrounded by the threat of a dangerous disease. It could either kill his mother or the babe she was carrying in her belly. Not to mention, his other 3 siblings were also in danger. And the sad thing was, he knew no sure way to eradicate this disease. Harry was no professional healer, and his meager potion skills were of no use because of a lack of specific ingredients. It's not as if the North was teeming with magical plants and magical creatures. All of a sudden, his eyes widened at the thought of magical creatures. Harry rushed out of his room towards the gift room with all the speed his small legs could churn out. The gift room was an old chamber where all the gifts the lords of Winterfell and Winter Kings of old received were safely stored. Chandeliers, purple-dyed drapes, ruby-encrusted weaponry, and stuffed heads of animals adorned the chamber. not to mention dusty old chests, possibly holding many more expensive and exotic items. The guards stationed outside the chamber were reluctant to let him pass, but a simple confundo did the trick, and he was inside. Accio unicorn horn. The white-colored horn that was gifted to his father by a Skagos flew into his waiting hand. It didn't have the silvery shine that he was familiar with, but the horn belonged to a unicorn nonetheless. Harry placed the Elder Wand on the unicorn horn and closed his eyes. A small stream of magic trickled down from his wand into the horn while he waited patiently. 2 minutes passed before he felt a dull echo from within the horn. The echo proved the horn was magical in nature, and it could hold magic if channeled into it properly. Harry was not so surprised by the fact that the horn was drained of almost all residual magic. He was more than sure the weirwood trees were sucking magic dry from anything that is living for some odd reason. He had an idea why that was happening, but he thought he'd confirm his suspicions with spring. But then the spring sickness blindsided him, and the castle was in lockdown for days under the orders of Maester Luwin. The old master only deemed the castle safe once every nook and cranny of Winterfell was smoked using some medicinal herb. But even now, some preventative measures were in place. All inhabitants of the castle were only allowed to drink boiled water. The floors, cloths, and other utensils were daily washed with boiled water, and everyone was required to wash their hands from time to time. The restrictions around his mother's chambers were far more strenuous. However, now that he was holding a unicorn horn, Harry's mind swam with ideas. But first, he needed more information. Tucking the unicorn horn safely under his arm, Harry stepped out of the chamber, ready to seek out Maester Luwin. "I'm so sorry, Maester. If only I had known those merchants were carrying this sickness, I'd have had them booted out of the north." Luwin fought the urge to rub his forehead and pondered a way to get rid of the overly apologetic Lord of White Harbor from his chambers. The man has been apologizing for days, and still, Lord Manderley was not satisfied with his long string of apologies. In the first few days of the outbreak, it was understandable as Lord Manderley was in a precarious position. The Lord of White Harbor has unwittingly put the heavily pregnant wife and children of his liege lord at risk by bringing sick Bravosi merchants to Winterfell. The merchants were wooed by the promise of Valyrian steel, and they were willing to buy it at an exorbitant price. If everything had gone as planned, Luwin imagined the Starks would have been some million gold richer. Instead, the whole castle was now being scrubbed floor to floor, and the town below remained under the grip of the spring sickness. I couldn't easily say no to those merchants, you know. They were representing some of the wealthiest families in Braavos. White Harbor can ill afford to alienate the oligarchs of Braavos, said Wyman Manderley, his pale blue eyes shining earnestly, as if to convey his precarious position. "I understand, Lord Wyman. Nobody is blaming you," said Luwin for the umpteenth time. "That's good to know. How is Lady Catelyn?" asked Lord Wyman. "Lady Stark is in good health, my lord. She has been isolated to a wing of the castle where she will be kept away from any chance of infection," Luwin said, eyeing the portly Northman. "Oh, that's good to know. Mayhaps you would like the assistance of my Maester. It would be no trouble at all to have Maester Lauren give his aid in these troubling times." Lord Wyman offered earnestly, "My lord, there is a small-scale spread of this sickness in White Harbor as well. It'd not be wise for Maester Lauren to abandon his post." Luwin pointed out patient. "Of course you are right, Maester Luwin. I forgot. But if there is anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." Luwin smiled and nodded. He understood the Lord of White Harbor was going out of his way to ensure nothing bad happens. But Luwin had everything under control. The moment he treated the Bravosi merchants who fell ill, he had the whole castle in lockdown. The symptoms exhibited by those Bravosi were remarkably similar to the symptoms reported during the Great Spring Sickness. Blistering skin, nausea, dry cough, vomiting, and red eyes were some of the well-known symptoms. The only consolation was that those who fell ill didn't die within a day. Some had managed to even partially recover, like the Bravosi merchants under his care. The Great Spring Sickness was far more dangerous than this one, and he thanked the gods, old and new, for this small mercy. There is no known cure known to him or the Citadel for this sickness. The only thing he could do is to prevent the spread of the sickness and thereby eradicate it. Healthy food and water should maintain the body's health condition, and the only form of medicine he knew to combat this disease involved using the lemon leaves. Archmaester Oarsman was the one to find medicinal uses for lemon leaves during the Great Spring Sickness. Lemon leaves, either fresh or dried, are dipped in hot water inside a closed vessel for 10 minutes. Once the leaves are soaked well in the hot water, the medicine will be ready to drink. The medicine thus produced should be taken 3 times a day, and it was shown to increase the chances of survival among people. Another valid way of treating this disease is to use lemon juice, but lemons are far more expensive and hard to obtain in large quantities, so he was limited in his abilities to chase the disease away from Wintertown. This put him in a uniquely disturbing position. The longer the sickness lingers in Wintertown, the greater are the odds for the sickness to spread into the castle. His musings were cut short when Harrion decided to barge into his chamber, surprising not just him, but Lord Wyman as well. And as usual, Harrion held another unimaginable claim to share. Maester Luwin, I can cure the spring sickness. Of course you can, Harrion. Why would it be any other way? Luwin thought, palming his face at the thought of the strange trajectory his life has been taking with each passing day. Harry was no potion master, but he is an expert in runes. He had to become one to learn the secrets behind the Deathly Hallows. He may have failed to reverse the effects of the Hallows, but his journey to the goal did leave him with a better understanding of runes and rituals. Ancient runes were the foundation upon which modern wizarding magic was built upon. Even potions were developed with the aid of runes and basic arithmancy. There is a reason why runes are strenuously used in rituals instead of just using a specific spell to fire up the ritual. Runes provided a platform for more complex components to work in tandem with the required effects expected from a ritual. As rituals usually pull chaotic magic from the world, it is quite common to use runes that induce vitality in the recipient. This was done to ensure the recipient to not only avoid getting overwhelmed by the chaotic magic, but also to cleanse any unforeseen defects in the body that may tamper with the ritual. Usually, the script used for this purpose is the Ouroboros script that represents renewal or the cycle of life and death. The unicorn horn Harry took was nowhere magically strong enough to heal the sick, mostly because there was little magic left in the horn to begin with. But a few combinations of the Ouroboros script and some Magica Effusia scripts etched on the horn would ensure the healing properties of the horn to climb high. It was by no means anywhere close to the effects of a full-fledged unicorn horn, but it should be close enough to tackle this non-magical sickness. Etching the runic scripts or even making the medicine is not the hard part. The hardest part is to impugn the horn with enough magic to kickstart its medicinal properties. Being the unfortunate owner of an underage body, Harry was not developed enough to imbue magic into a dense magical construct without drawbacks. The unicorn horn adorned with runic scripts specifically set for absorbing magic would be a catastrophe for Harry, who was only developing his magical powers. So only one other person could imbue the horn with magic in Winterfell. Are you sure you will be able to gather enough magic in one day? Harry asked, watching Spring arrange small rocks in a circle on the ground before the heart tree with the unicorn horn sitting conspicuously at the very center of the circle. Weirwood trees are saturated with ancient magic, Harry and Stark. The heart tree, on the other hand, holds magic as old as this world. It holds a portion of the magic of all those who have bonded to its life thread. Greenseers and children have imbued the heart trees with their magic for thousands of years. If it is your goal to imbue this horn with as much magic as quickly as possible, this is the way, said Spring, her melodious voice flowing like a gentle stream. Can't you directly imbue magic into the horn? He asked. I can, but I prefer this method. If it is healing the sick among your people that you seek, then this will be the best way. The ancestors in the heart tree will judge your intent and bless you with their magic, said Spring. Setting the whole arrangement, Spring climbed back into the heart tree while Harry observed everything from the ground. The horn will be ready by sunrise tomorrow, said Spring, after settling into a thick enough branch. How do you intend to use it? I'll show you if you come into the castle tomorrow. Harry offered, but as always, Spring declined his offer. It is better for my presence to remain a secret. It will be better if you come out in the open, said Harry. My people once lived peacefully amongst mankind. We got slaughtered and chased out of our lands by your kind. If it wasn't for the danger lurking beyond the wall, I wouldn't have visited these lands, said Spring, before disappearing behind the cover of blood-red leaves of the weirwood trees in the godswood. Even if the druid, he was not calling a highly intelligent and old race children, hid herself among the thick leaves, he knew she was observing him. So we never spoke about the three-eyed raven and what he wants with me. Harry said as he leaned back against the heart tree. The three-eyed raven is a powerful green seer who is gifted by the old gods to have watched the beginning and the end. Harry's eyebrows were raised all the way to his hairline, hearing Spring's claim. He could feel the end-of-the-world vibes coming from the druid. Good for him, I suppose. So what's that got to do with me? He asked. The cold winds are rising, Harry and Stark, and the dead rises with it. You are the only one blessed with strong magic south of the wall. The three-eyed raven would like to teach you to control your gift, and use it when the realms of men face their great enemy. What great enemy? Harry asked, struggling not to roll his eyes. This was getting too dramatic for his tastes. Death, Harry and Stark. For what else is the enemy of life? Asked Spring. I could think of other enemies far worse than death. Death is a release from the bonds of life. Without death, there is no meaning for life, said Harry, closing his eyes, feeling the weight of the years he had lived for a brief moment. Only if the death you are talking about is not subverted from its natural course. Harry and Stark. The White Walkers serve a terrible entity that intends to consume the spirit plane. They kill and absorb the souls of their victims to power this terrible entity so that it may eradicate all light from this world, said Spring, making Harry frown. That sounds an awful lot like a super dementor or something, Harry thought, involuntarily letting out a shiver at the very thought. What's this entity's name, if you don't mind me asking? We don't know. Harry and Stark came during the Age of Dawn to this continent, fleeing from the east. It slumbered far away in the coldest part of Westeros, surrounded by darkness and frost. My people knew nothing of war, and so we never bothered the creature. Little did we know that it would rouse from slumber once the Green King set foot in our lands. Green King? Who's that? He asked, enthralled by the story. Do another time, Harry and Stark. The cover of darkness is near, and I need to meditate, said Spring, before falling silent. Harry scowled, looking up, but he could only see the red leaves of the heart tree. Disappointed that he was not getting a cool story out of Spring, he decided to call it a day. Tomorrow, he'd pull the story out of Spring. With that consoling thought, Harry took his leave from the Godswood. It was a wonderful morning with bright rays of sunlight streaming through the blue sky. The snow finally stopped dropping, and it looked like warmth was once again returning to the north. It was a joyous occasion. Winter represented stagnation, cold, and struggle. Oftentimes, it was the unfortunate reality of life. But summer meant joy, prosperity, and rejuvenation. And it seems winter was dying down in favor of summer. It was at a great timing, too, in Harry's opinion. He eyed the unicorn horn, sitting inside a clay pot with runes shining eerily in bright green color. The water inside the pot slowly turned into a thick, viscous green liquid in a matter of minutes. When the process was complete, Maester Luwin picked the horn out of the pot using a set of tongs before placing it in another pot filled to the brim with hot water. It was truly a marvelous piece of magic, and the funny thing was, he never intended to create this green concoction. The runes Harry had carved into the unicorn horn was supposed to absorb magic at an incredible rate, and then when the horn was dipped in water, it was supposed to impugn the water with healing properties, yet the water changed into a green concoction that exhibits all the properties that he imagined and then some. Turns out, the green concoction not only acts as a drinkable healing potion, but also as a salve capable of eradicating any skin diseases. Maester Luwin applied the green paste on the blistering skin of the two Bruvosi merchants just to see whether there were any healing effects. It only took 5 minutes for the skin to absorb the green paste, and left in its wake was clear, dark skin with no sign of blisters. The two Bruvosi were considerably interested and quite grateful to be free from the grip of spring sickness. In short, the two merchants were guinea pigs for his healing potion. Maester Luwin has so far kept that little detail quiet from the two Associ merchants. Once it was proven that the potion was quite effective, Maester Luwin was quick to distribute it to all the residents of the castle. Obviously, this was cause for celebration, as a deadly disease was about to get eradicated within a short span of time. However, this was not the only cause for celebration. The little bundle of silk and fur hiding the newborn baby in Maester Luwin's hand was enough reason for Winterfell to be in a celebrating mood. Maester Luwin, please let me touch my sister, Robb begged. I'm afraid not, young Rob. Your sister must rest easy for the coming days and away from unnecessary contacts. The spring sickness remain at large, and it's not safe for the baby, said Maester Luwin with warning in his eyes. But have you made the green water that makes everyone happy? Everyone says so, Sansa said, training her large blue eyes on the Maester confusedly. Harry's hands twitched to pinch his sister's chubby face at the expression on her face. Sansa reminded him of his eldest daughter, Stephanie, whom he loved so dearly and was too cute for her own good. All it took for her was to shine her puppy eyes at him, and he would fold to whatever whims that took her fancy. Yes, little Sansa, but the baby may fall ill. In time, you can touch the baby, but for now, let your sister rest safe. Maester Luwin cautioned. The Maester showed off their new sibling for a bit more time before walking back into their mother's chamber with the baby in hand. Since the sickness was still at large, it was deemed dangerous for their mother to step out of her assigned chambers. Not to mention, she had only just given birth and the dangers of winter were still in play. The weather was improving, but that doesn't mean it was all perfect. This meant their mother would remain confined to her chambers for many days to come. This was not taken well by Robb or Sansa. No one felt the absence of their mother more so than Sansa. It didn't help that Septa Mordane was no longer among the living standing, ready to organize fake tea parties for his little sister. Harry would have felt responsible if not for the fact that the zealot Septa dug her own grave by whispering nonsense and hatred in his mother's ears. In his opinion, it was a terrible misjudgment on the Septa's part to underestimate the love a mother holds for her children. After all, Harry is the living proof that a mother's love can transcend even death. So he was not all that surprised to see the Septa hang on a rope for all of Winterfell to see. What surprised him the most was how little this bothered the inhabitants of the castle. But that all changed with the arrival of the Braavosi merchants and the subsequent spread of spring sickness. Some people, including Maester Luwin and his mother, afraid that the new gods were punishing them for hanging the Septa. It was a legitimate fear for the ignorant masses, and the timing did not help at all. However, that bit of bad business could be put behind them. Now, seeing as the cure was available and it was quite effective, of course there was the matter of distributing the cure, and he had no idea how that worked. Despite Harry's showing of far-fetched skills, he was still treated as a boy of his age. Maester Luwin was reluctant to divulge any details on how the medicine would be used. Frustrating as that is, he understood the Maester. That doesn't mean he didn't leave some listening charms on the Maester's chain links. It was one of the reasons why he decided to break away from his siblings and shut himself inside the confines of the library. There he could listen keenly to what was going on, and it was an important conversation as well. Mostly it was surrounding the updates from the war front. Apparently, Stannis Baratheon, the Lord of Dragonstone, managed to break the Iron Fleet near Fair Isle. The good news didn't end there. Jaime Lannister managed to lead the Lannister armies into victory by reliving the Crag and Banefort castles from the raiding Ironborn. The defeat in the sea pushed the Iron Fleet back to the shores of the Iron Islands. With the western shores free from Ironborn raids, the king, as well as his armies, sailed for Pike with the Royal Fleet and Redwyne Fleet. While this was happening, Sar Barristan of the Kingsguard and Lord Stannis was sieging Old Wyke and Great Wyke respectively. With the Iron Fleet reduced to a handful of longships and the king laying siege to Pike itself, it was hoped the war would come to a speedy conclusion. No one was doubtful of the war's inevitable conclusion. The Greyjoys were about to lose the war. They started, and King Robert was assured of another victory, cementing his rule. Harry could hear the audible sound of relief from his mother when the Maester unraveled the affairs of the South. He listened for a few more minutes before he grew bored of eavesdropping and decided to spend some time hunting for some information. Chief among them was more details about the Age of Heroes. To ensure no one disturbed him and his research, he set up a Muggle-repelling ward around the library, after which he dove headfirst into the dusty old tomes of Winterfell's library. The good thing about having a library as old as one in Winterfell is that there is quite a large anthology of manuscripts and books. But the sad part is, quite a good portion of that collection was decaying and being lost to the wheel of time. The only saving grace is that a wave of the Elder Wand can restore those decaying books and scrolls in a jiffy. But Harry could not cast a wide area charm. Rather, he was forced to selectively use the charm owing to his diminished magical power. And so his quest for knowledge continued unabated, if only held back by some small factors. The history of this world fascinated him to no end. Chiefly, the stagnation suffered by Westeros and Essos, for that matter, astounded him. His family, the Starks, claimed descendants from Brandon the Builder, a mythical hero who lived in the Age of Heroes. The book that he was reading at present, True History, written by Maesters Quincy and Seder, claims the wall was put up around 8,000 years ago. There was no substantial proof, but merely it is a claim made by the two Maesters, based on their research into northern myths and stories. Even if this claim is false, the next claim by some Maesters put the time to 6,000 years. The Andal invasion is also a contentious issue among the learned men of the Citadel. The True History claims the Andals came 4,000 years ago. Some Maesters, like Dynestan, claim it's only 2,000 years since Andals sailed to Westeros. Either way, the point stands that the human race of this world remained terribly stagnant. It is not clear exactly when the first men began using bronze weapons and tools, but it took them nearly 2,000 years to start using steel. The Andals had learned the steel-making process from the Rhoynar far early than the first men. Yet they were content in their knowledge and never made any significant progress for almost 6,000 years. The most advanced civilization supposedly lay in the Far East, beyond the Jade Sea, and this information came from rumors and hearsay, so he was reluctant to believe anything of the sort until he lay his eyes on those famed cities. The Valyrians were also a civilization of interest purely because they managed to subjugate dragons to their will. That was a feat not even seen in the wizarding world. The dragons of his world were fiercely independent and would never allow any other creature to dictate its destiny. There were rumors that Merlin had a pet dragon, but rumors often held not a drop of truth. Even the most esteemed and powerful of wizards never managed to tame a dragon as the Valyrians had supposedly done. While he found the Valyrians interesting, owing to their incredible magic, he was more interested in the first men. For the North, everything and anything started with Brandon Stark, or Bran the Builder, as he is called among the North folk. It is said Brandon Stark was the first king of winter, and learned his craft from the children. Supposedly, he learned magic from the children, and raised the wall to keep the others from threatening the realms of men. There were even stories of other petty kings of the North, like the Barrow Kings, Red Kings, the Glovers, and 1,000 other petty kings and kingdoms. But try as he might, he could not find a peep about the Green King Spring was talking about. Maybe I should explore the historical and mythical figures outside the North. Harry thought before he flipped the pages of True History and started from the Riverlands. So lost in his search, he didn't feel the time pass away at all. It was only when the door to the library slid open did he look up from the large tome. To his surprise, it was Maester Luwin, and somehow the old Maester managed to penetrate the wards. Harry sat up. How did that happen? Harry wondered in the confines of his mind, even as he stood up from his seat to greet the Maester. Maester Luwin, what a surprise! His greeting was waved away by the old Maester, who proceeded to sag into a nearby chair. The chain that signified the knowledge of a learned Maester of Citadel clinked away like no tomorrow. And among those links, Harry eyed the brightest one that supposedly represented the mastery of the occult, or higher mysteries, as Maester Luwin called it. That link was supposed to be made of Valyrian steel, but it was nothing of that sort. After all, Harry had checked by comparing the magical enchantments with those he found on ice. He could say with confidence that the link did not contain an ounce of Valyrian steel. This made Harry wonder why the lords of Westeros never suspected the sham the Citadel was pulling. If Maesters surely knew to make Valyrian steel, then surely the Citadel would have been spawning out weapons made out of the coveted steel, and making a mountain full of gold. He suspected no one bothered to ask the right questions to find out the truth, simply because the lords of Westeros were simpletons. Or maybe they knew and they were just turning a blind eye to what some old geezers in gray robes were claiming. I suppose you have no idea how much time has passed, do you? Asked Maester Luwin, with disappointment shining in his eyes. I'm sorry, Maester. I was looking for something. Maester Luwin eyed him suspiciously. Looking for what? I was looking for someone called the Green King. Do you know someone like that in the North, Maester? For a moment, Maester Luwin eyed him silently. You should be out there with children your age, and play rather than chase grandiloquent tales of ages past. If I was like every other child, then I wouldn't be me. That seems to take back Maester Luwin somewhat. I suppose you are right. Maester Luwin muttered reluctantly, "Now, why are you interested in this Green King?"
I have to know Maester Luwin. Do you by any chance know of any First Men mythical figures by this name?
The Green King, huh? Master Luwin pondered, with a frown adorning his aging face. The creases on his temples stood pronounced. There is no First Man called Green King, certainly not in the north. Although, what is it? Harry leaned forward eagerly. You could call Garth Greenhand the Green King. Some stories describe him as the High King of First Men, but of course, the Northerners do not believe that story, and the same goes for Masters of the Citadel, said Master Luwin. Who is Garth Greenhand, and why have I not heard anything about him? The Northerners don't like the stories surrounding Garth the Gardener. Especially the Starks, the Gardeners were once the kings of the Reach before Aegon's conquest. According to legends, Garth led the first men to the continent of Westeros. He was of green skin and had antlers protruding from his temples.
So he was like the Green Men?
Harry asked, remembering the nighttime tales spun by Old Nan. Green men are not real, Harry. They are just stories passed down from ages past. We Maesters believe Garth to be just like any other man, except maybe he was the leader of his tribe. The ancient First Men were tribal, and most likely Garth was the leader of one of the largest tribes to settle in the Reach, said Maester Luwin. Tell me more, Harry said eagerly. Not now, and perhaps never. The Starks dislike this legend. Why? Because the northern houses, and most importantly House Stark, derive their right to rule the whole north from the first king, the king of all First Men that came to Westeros. Garth Greenhand is a rival to that claim, and the Starks of old have repeatedly refuted the claims made by Gardeners, most fiercely. Master Luwin explained, shaking his head. Now enough of these old tales and myths. There is something else I want to talk to you about. Oh, I'm all ears, Meister, said Harry, setting aside the Green King for the moment. I've received a raven from your father. He asks whether you will be ready to forge another Valyrian steel weapon. If anything, this news was surprising. He'd have never imagined his father would ask him to do such a thing. Harry got the impression that his father was troubled by his ability to wield magic, but that concern was somehow swept away if his father was asking for another Valyrian steel weapon. Perhaps. I may have misjudged Eddard Stark, Harry thought. So, another sword then. I can do that, Harry said, nodding to himself. Oh no, Harrion. It's not a sword, but rather a warhammer. You'll be having the honor of making a weapon for King Robert Baratheon, said Maester Luwin. Oh, despite all the serious business of the day, when night came, Winterfell was lit up by colors courtesy of his runic firecrackers, the night sky lit up with 1,000 lights, celebrating the arrival of the medicine. The coming days certainly gave them all hope to be free from the grip of spring sickness and a return to normalcy. Robert's booming laughter prevailed over the chaos of the battlefield. The more Ironborn that came at the King of the Seven Kingdoms, stronger the swings of his warhammer became. And on every swing, the eldest Baratheon proved that he was every bit of a descendant of the Storm Kings of old. Ours the fury indeed, Eddard thought, as he cleaved the head of an overzealous Ironborn who tried to one-up him in this dance of steel. After facing down into the jaws of death at the tip of Ser Arthur Dayne's sword, some foolish Ironborn with subpar skills was child's play for him. The same could be said of Robert, who faced down Rhaegar at the Trident. His friend had crushed not just Rhaegar, but the Dragon Prince's lackeys on that fateful day. 6 years later, Eddard was once again witnessing the demon of the Trident take the field. Another group of Ironborn charged towards his position. But Sir Roderick and Jory Castle, flanking him on the sides, dispatched them with ease, leaving a lone Ironborn as his opponent. Eddard didn't even entertain the fool, and merely swatted away the man's axe before smashing his shield on his enemy's head. The Ironborn fell with a cracked skull, never to rise again. The rocky terrain upon which the Castle of Pike sat was difficult to traverse for a large army. Yet, by the grace of gods, they were steadily gaining ground. Eddard was quite disheartened to see the Ironborn were fighting to the last man. He'd have gathered Balon Greyjoy would see sense and surrender. It seemed old Balon has more pride than sense. Your Grace, Eddard shouted as he swatted a sword that came too close to Jory's side, allowing the captain of his personal guards the upper hand in his duel. All the more fun for me, Ned, Robert boomed with laughter. For a moment, Eddard wondered whether the sound was Robert's laughter or the cracking of skull. It could be either of those, but Eddard was hard-pressed to wonder about such trivial matters when he was pressing into the castle. Sieging the castle of Pike was no easy task. The seat of Seastone Chair sat on a barren rock surrounded by barren islands made of gray-black stone, the same stone which was used to build the ancient seat of House Har. On these barren rocks, numerous towers sat interconnected by bridges. To defend the Gret Keep, to access the main castle, they had to take Lord Sport and anchor their ships there. From there, the royal army fought for every inch of land. One by one, the towers surrounding the castle fell to the might of their swords, and yet the Ironborn were quite ready to spill their blood for a doomed cause. If nothing else, he commended the loyalty these people held for Balon Greyjoy. The fighting ensued without end, and the rocky islands were wet with the blood of Ironborn. Time passed, and their army pushed further and further, felling many Ironborn warriors. The Greyjoy guards, wearing black iron breastplates, were most ferocious in defending the Isles. For all their valor, the Ironborn were no match against the combined armies of Stormlands, Westerlands, and the North. Lord Stark, I might be wrong, but I think I see a stone bridge not too far away. Tyrion Lannister shouted over the Song of Steel. Eddard generally distrusted any Lannisters after his encounter with Jaime Lannister and Tywin Lannister in the Red Keep. But he found Tyrion Lannister to be someone with a sense of honor. The man has been nothing but courteous during the whole campaign, preferring to dine with fellow soldiers rather than seeking comforts and extravagance afforded to his station. He could respect someone like that. He remembered a lesson his father imparted before he was sent off to the Vale. Judge a man not by how he treats his equals, but by how he treats his inferiors. Eddard considered himself a simple man, owing to his position as the second son. He was not brought up to rule from Winterfell, and he learned early on to not covet glory or power. Those were assigned to his elder brother as the gods willed it. And yet the gods were cruel to take his brother away, leaving him with far greater responsibility and power than he ever imagined. He could easily see some parts of what he would have been in Tyrion Lannister. It was one of the reasons why he took a liking to the youngest brother of Tywin Lannister. It helped the man was also a good storyteller. Unlike the songs would have you believe, army camps are terribly dull. It is often the storytellers and bards who alleviate the cold grip of death over a soldier's neck. "Look, Ned, we are near the stone bridge," Robert shouted. Sure enough, he could see the stone bridge bonding the Bloody Keep to the Great Keep. The stone bridge led to the Seastone Chair. This war is nearly over, Eddard thought with some relief. He missed his wife and his children. He was eager to see them, but first he had a crack in the crush for his king. How about this, Robert? Let's see who can first reach the Seastone Chair. The sturdy Northmen by my side, or the bold Stormlanders by your side. Hi. I thought you'd never ask. Robert roared, smashing a poor sod with his warhammer, spilling blood and bone in a single strike. Some enthusiastic fighting. Later, Eddard stood beside Robert in the throne room of Pike. He eyed the Seastone Chair made of a rock so black it seemed to suck out the light. The whole hall was dreary-looking. It was no different from the rest of the Isles. The words of House Greyjoy are, "We do not sow." It seemed these Isles were enshrining those words by the looks of it. If these people were living on barren rocks all their lives, he could see why they considered it normal to steal from others. The Ironborn are a bunch of thieves, but they are far worse than the average bandits. Eddard thought, eyeing the thralls inside the castle. So, you are the Lord Reaper, eh? You don't look like you can stand a strong wind, old man. I hope you realize the folly of rebelling against your king, Robert mocked. Rebel? I did not rebel against anyone, said Balon Greyjoy, in a rasping voice that made Eddard liking the sound to grinding rocks. You rebelled against your rightful king, Lord Greyjoy. Have you forgotten the oaths you and yours swore? Eddard reminded the would-be king. Oaths, Lord Stark? I have not sworn any oaths to a Baratheon. No Ironborn has ever sworn any oaths to any Baratheon. To the dragons we bowed, and the last dragon is dead. Your king is no dragon for my oaths to bind, Balon growled. Eddard thought, the man just have a death wish to bring up the Targaryens in the presence of Robert. He could already see his childhood friend was ready to crush Balon's skull with his hammer. Robert. He cautioned his friend, and that seems to work as Robert took a deep breath and let go of his rage.
Very well then, Greyjoy. Have it your way.
Robert surged forward and sat on the sea stone chair before all the assembled lords and knights. "Someone bring me my crown." Robert shouted, and a boy quickly brought a steel crown with antlers. Wearing the crown, Robert sat as regally as he could on the sea stone chair. Eddard gathered that the current throne must be a world of difference compared to the Iron Throne, as he could see Robert hum appreciatively, "You say you have not sworn any oaths to me, Greyjoy. I shall correct this travesty. Bend your knee, swear your fealty to me and my heirs. Do this, and you may live and rule Pike as your ancestors have," Robert demanded. Eddard let out a sigh of relief when Balon Greyjoy bent his knee and swore his oaths.
That was not hard. Now was it?
Now comes the matter of reparations for this costly war. I will be taking all your stolen wealth and distributing it to those who were affected by your attacks. And I suppose there ought to be hostages to ensure your good behavior. I am told you have a son still breathing. Robert guffawed, breaking into laughter while calling for wine to celebrate his victory. Eddard shook his head at his friend's antics and hopes he'd stop needlessly antagonizing a beaten enemy. Either way, he was happy that the whole war has come to an end. He could finally go home and be surrounded by the warmth of his family. The Greyjoy Rebellion, as the Maesters were calling it, was finally over. The room was dark, save for the golden runes blinking away like no tomorrow. Robb, Jon, and Sansa were looking at the glow with wide, bright eyes. Old Nan and her great-grandson, Hodor, watched the runes with worship in their eyes. Old Nan was even whispering a prayer to the old gods in the old tongue, the ancient language of the First Men, which was fast disappearing even at the heart of First Men culture. It was a crude language, primal even. Perhaps that's why the old tongue resonated well with raw magic. Harry stayed focused on the task, despite the audience. He had tried to do this discreetly, but Jon came across what he was doing. From Jon, Robb learned of what was happening. Unfortunately, Robb was staying with Sansa, and that's how she came here. On the way, Sansa let Old Nan know what was transpiring, and so Old Nan came over to watch the spectacle. He had no idea how Hodor wandered in, but he was sure there was a reasonable explanation. Anyway, the runes glowing eerily on his hands were carefully crafted over the course of hours, and perhaps even days, if the time it took to make the ritual knife is to be counted. The ritual knife in his hands looked like it was made of pure gold. It was not pure good, but it was gold all the same. It took some creative maneuvering for him to possess that much gold, but being the son of a lord of Winterfell has its perks. The ritual knife shined brightly as he carefully carved the runes in small circles around each of his fingers. It's a dangerous task, but this remained the only way he could think of to hold greater amounts of magic within his body for the time being. The runes were of Nordic origin, just as most runic magic involved with the raw magic of the planet is concerned. The First Men runes were not suited for what he intended, as the First Men rarely used to store magic in their body. The same could be said for the Children of Forest. They consecrated their hard-earned magic on weirwood trees, or the stone idols that they bury around the heart tree. There were some strange customs even among the druids of this world. Sometimes even he struggled to fathom the intricate customs Spring talks about, and he thought he had seen it all. Anyway, Harry found an effective solution to his magic drain problem. Since it became clear that rune-enforced objects can hold magic in considerable amounts in this world, he decided to carve runes on his body. Not just any runes. These were runes carefully constructed over weeks of intense brainstorming designed to restrict the drain of magic from his body. For an average wizard, 3 specific parts of the body are capable of releasing and absorbing magic in large quantities. Among the 3, the first place goes to the hands. It is well known that wrists are capable of releasing large quantities of magical energy. It's one of the reasons why wizards use wands, staffs, and rings as conduits. The second place goes to the eyes, followed by the legs. Magic performed through a visual medium is often dangerous. Usually it leads to wide area spells that stretches the limits of a wizard. Often this mode of magic is performed under extreme duress. Then there are the legs, which are the weakest of the 3 in the case of wizards. Anyway, the idea Harry was pushing through was to restrict the flow of magic from his wrists. Usually, creating blocks like these are not exactly healthy, but in his case, it remained the only solution. If he is to conserve his magic and ensure he had the magic at his beck and call, then this was the only way, else he might just become magically impotent by the time he reaches 16, when his soul stabilizes in his body. After carving the last piece of runes on his right pinky finger, he looked at the handiwork. All 10 fingers now sported blood-red runes which looked like illegible scribbles to the untrained eye. "Does it hurt?" asked Rob, concern shining in his eyes. "I used a numbing charm on my hands. Someone could cut my hands off, and I wouldn't feel a thing," said Harry, preparing to start the next step of the ritual, missing the squeamish look on the faces of his audience. Summoning the Elder Wand into his right hand, Harry began drawing runes on the floor along with the pentagram. Rituals that involved any living beings required the use of pentagram. The 5 tips of the pentagram represented the basic forces of nature like earth, wind, water, fire, and lightning. It's not just about the forces of nature, but also about the congruence of the feminine and masculine within oneself. After completing the ritual circle, Harry began placing 6 cups in specific places in the circle. 5 cups were placed along a circular axis tracing a pentagon shape, while the 6th was placed at the very center of the pentagram. He filled 3 cups with mud, water, fire, and the 4th he left it empty to signify the realm of wind or space. The 5th cup was a bit tricky, but he drew the rune for power in place of lightning. Now only the 6th cup remained. After dismissing the Elder Wand, he took out the ritual knife once more. With the sharp edge pressing into the palm of his left hand, he squeezed hard, letting his blood fill up the 6th cup. When the cup was half filled with his blood, Harry took the knife away from his palm. Kneeling down, Harry placed all 10 of his fingers on the ground. He leaned down so that his face was hovering over the 6th cup. "Illuminar," Harry breathed out into the cup. The blood in the cup rippled 6 times, and the runes lit up with a bright blue aura. There was a strong gust of wind signaling the pull of great amounts of chaotic magic. Seeing as he was performing the ritual inside one of the old chambers of the First Keep, he was not so surprised. Just as Hogwarts sat on one of the ley lines, he was sure the First Keep was built over a similar one, albeit not as strong as the one in Hogwarts. The pentagram slowly lost its blue glow in favor of taking on a golden hue. The magic suddenly rushed into his hands through his fingers, lighting up the runes around his fingers. There was a blinding flash of light, and then the ritual circle disappeared, as did the contents of the 6 cups. The runes on his hand continued to glow eerily for a time before growing dimmer. "It was beautiful. Do it again," Sansa said, clapping her hands exuberantly. "Maybe some other time," Harry said, which made Sansa pout. "All right, folks, the show is over. Now let's take our leave before Maester Luwin somehow finds all of us and proceed to make our lives difficult." They all took their leave, and Harry slept soundly that night. The next day he was in the training yard, trying desperately to keep up with the grueling training exercises. He was padded up from head to toe. On his head there was a helmet, and the stupid visor messed with his vision. He could barely see anything in front of him, and he felt like he was a tortoise pawing around, trying to make a move. "Harry, stop being lazy and swing that sword," Sellos Poole ordered while tapping on Harry's helmet with a wooden sword. Harry flinched and scowled inside the helmet. He so wanted to escape this ridiculous training. But outside of using the Imperious Curse, he could think of no other way to escape. Using the Unforgivables were reserved for the most desperate of moments. Besides, he doubted he is holding enough magic in his body to perform an unforgivable curse. After all, the effects of the ritual would take 6 days to take effect. So, with some effort, he began swinging the wooden sword in his hand, a slash to the left, a slash to the right, and finally a jab straight ahead with the tip. Just doing that made him huff, and he was sweating up a mountain inside all the padding. "Not bad, Harry. Now keep those legs apart. Let me see some foot movements, boy." Sellos grunted. Harry grunted, but acquiesced with his trainer's orders and tried his best. But, as always, his best was not acceptable. For Sellos Poole, the man had it for him for some reason. According to Sellos Poole, Harry is a lazy slob. Unlike his 2 siblings, he didn't totally disagree with the man. He has a lackadaisical attitude to the whole weapons training program put forth by Sellos. It's not cause he has any disrespect for the man. He just didn't see much advantage in using weapons when he has magic on his side. In the worst case scenario, he could always fall back on a knife as a hand-to-hand combat weapon. Swinging around swords is not his cup of tea. Tea, he suddenly thought. His mind conjured up the sweet aroma of hot tea. It felt like aeons since he tasted tea. A blow to the back of his head broke him out of his daydream. What are you doing, boy? When you have a weapon in your hand, you focus your mind on that and nothing else. Now do those steps. This time, no mistake, or I'll make you run around the courtyard in those padding. That threat roused Harry to focus. The last thing he wanted was to get stuck in this attire, more than strictly necessary. Somehow, Harry managed to drag his feet through the training session. Rob and Jon, on the other hand, loved these sessions. They couldn't wait to get their hands on some true steel weapons. He shuddered, thinking about two boys swinging around large steel swords. His mind went back to that fateful day in Slytherin's chamber where he was forced to use the sword of Gryffindor against the basilisk. It was by sheer dumb luck he survived the basilisk, not to mention not getting skewered by the sword as well. While he certainly loved making swords, he was not obsessed enough to use them in combat. Mostly because there was no reason for him to use one. If Harry wanted someone cut in half, he could use the Sectum Sempra curse. Why use a sword and take the risk of getting outsmarted by the enemy when he could cut his enemies like ribbons with a wave of his wand? At least that's the thought running through his mind. But he was careful not to share that with anyone. The last thing he needed was for people to know that he can weaponize magic in such a way that trounce all the conventional weaponry. After all, the North has a good track record in dealing with those who weaponize magic in the past. Examples of the old Green Seers and the Warg King came to his mind. The Winter Kings of old slaughtered all those magic users and their male progeny. The female heirs were then married into House Stark, strengthening the bloodline. He wondered if there was some hidden magical potential among his siblings. Waddling off to the small shack close to the courtyard, Harry started the process of getting out of the bulky padding. Rob and Jon joined him a bit later as they were far too enthusiastic to beat each other with a wooden sword in the mud. "You ran away before we could have a bout," Rob accused, stepping into the shack, followed by Jon. "It's called a tactical retreat, brother." Harry shot back while struggling with the padding tied around his back. "I'll help," Jon offered, making Harry turn his back to half-brother. "You are making that up. You are afraid I'll beat you," said Rob. Harry detected a hint of smugness from his twin, but he let it slide. Harry was more than aware Rob was a bit disappointed that he could not perform magic. Perhaps this was Rob's way of coping with the envy rearing up. "You're right, of course. My two brothers are so skilled with a sword, and it makes me afraid," said Harry. Being the children that they were, both Rob and Jon believed him going by their shared identical grin. "A kid's so gullible," Harry thought amusedly. After shedding off their protective gear, Harry, Rob, and Jon stepped out of the shack. The next bit of activity on their schedule was to go play hide-and-seek with Sansa, who should be free from her sewing lessons. Instead, they faced an irate Catelyn Stark outside the shack, waiting for them with an exasperated Maester Luwin. Just one look at the reddening face of his mother, Harry, knew there was trouble. She shouldn't be here and should be busy redecorating the castle in preparation for the king's arrival. So the fact that she is out in the open, especially in the courtyard, means they were in big trouble. It's a nice day. We are having warm sun and all. Harry's misguided attempt at diffusing the tension backfired spectacularly. His mother fished out a piece of black cloth on which a yellow pentagram was stitched and shoved it to his face. "Why is your sister obsessed with this? And why is she saying this is the symbol of the old gods? While you are at it, explain to me what in the name of gods, old and new, made you carve on your flesh with a knife." Harry stared at Catelyn gobsmacked before turning to his two siblings for support. To his surprise, they were nowhere to be seen. "Traitors!" he muttered. The door closed firmly on his back, and Harry let out a sigh. He was back in his room, and this time there was double the guards standing outside his door. His mother was not taking any chances, and was intent on seeing that he serve out his punishment term. Good thing I had the presence of mind to sneak in some books from the library. It's going to be a long week, Harry thought before jumping into the bed with a book from his secret collection. Tywin Lannister went through the reports in his Solar written by his kin in Lannisport. The extent of damage the Greyjoys have dealt them was truly massive. He didn't worry about the gold lost, cause he was going to wring that out of those thieving Ironborn for everything they took with interest. No. Rather, he was worried about the precarious position he found himself in, owing to the lack of a Lannister fleet. One night, his family possessed the strongest fleet in the Sunset Sea after the Red Wines, and the next morning, they didn't. Even if he has the gold to build the fleet back, he lacked the expert hands to do so. The Greyjoys were thorough in their attack. It's one of the reasons why he put a 20,000 gold dragons bounty on Euron Greyjoy's head. Sadly, the youngest of Greyjoy brothers were nowhere to be found. No matter, the Kraken will eventually find himself between the lion's jaws, he thought. A knock on the door disturbed his thoughts. "Come in," said Tywin, before going back to reviewing the reports and cataloging possible remedies he thought the port should take. "My Lord Lannister, a message from your brother Lord Tyrion," said Maester Kralin, placing the sealed parchment on his table. "Anything else?" he asked without looking up from his work. "The preparations for the tourney and the victory celebrations are coming along well, my lord." But Kralin hesitated. But what? "Shall I send invites to Dorne?" I gave Tywin pause and look up at Maester Kralin. "Send out the invites. Let them decide whether they participate or not," said Tywin. "Of course, my lord." Maester Kralin bowed before taking his leave. Once he was alone, Tywin took Tyrion's message into his hands. Breaking the seal, he read through the contents of the parchment. By the end of it, he was of two minds regarding the contents of the letter. King Robert, in his infinite wisdom, has decided to travel straight to Winterfell instead of accepting his invitation for the tourney. Thankfully, he was prepared and had yet to send out the specific date to any lords. But it still left a sour impression in his mind that his good son thought to spurn him. On the other hand, Tyrion has chosen to travel to Winterfell with Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. Apparently, the king has commissioned a Valyrian steel warhammer from his dearest friend. This interested him very much, and Tyrion's presence will gain him some good information about this Harrying Stark. If Eddard Stark's son was indeed capable of forging Valyrian steel, then he'd have the boy make one for his family to replace their long-lost ancestral sword Brightroar. Perhaps it'd be in his interest to have Harrying Stark as a part of his family. He could even offer the boy a lordship in the Westerlands with a Lannister bride. He was sure either of Stafford's daughters would be a suitable match for the Stark boy. Or maybe his daughter would be having a girl this time around. After all, Cersei was with child. He'd have never thought to give away a princess hand to a second son, but if the Stark boy can make Valyrian steel, then it remained imperative to tie the boy close to the family by any means. Even Robert would love to tie the Stark and Baratheon bloodlines together. But those were plans for the future. There are a great many enemies he could see on the horizon. Robert remained blind to them and was hunting the Targaryen siblings when those resources could be better spent on the enemies close to home. The Reach and Dorne were dangerous foes. Unlike any other time in the past, the Tyrells enjoyed an iron grip over the Reach Lords, thanks to carefully maneuvering themselves after the Blackfire rebellions and marrying into their regional rivals. The Hightowers and Red Wines were now kin with the Tyrells. Only the Florents remained estranged with the Wardens of the South. It remains to be seen whether House Florent would prove to be useful in undermining House Tyrell. He was not blind to those ambitious, up-jumped servants and their schemes with Renly. They were, for the moment, worming their way into Robert's good graces through the youngest Baratheon. Tywin was keeping a watch, and for the moment, the Tyrells were content with sending expensive gifts and whatnot to the young Lord of Storm's End. The real threat, however, was from the Martells. They were silent, too silent in his opinion. There was something brewing in the sands of Dorne, and he'd be there to foil their plans. They crossed him one time with betrothing Elia Martell to Rhaegar. He paid them back for that insult, and if they persist in crossing his path again, he'd teach them a valuable lesson. Lions are the kings of the forest. His blood will sit on the Iron Throne, thereby forging a dynasty that shall last for ages. Anything that threatens this legacy of his will be culled from the Seven Kingdoms.
The bells of the great sept of Baelor rung 7 times before falling silent. The High Septon has graciously ordered the bells of the sept to be rung 7 times at the end of each week, till the day the king returned to the city. To Jon, this was not only welcome, but also quite a joy. He loved to hear the great septa sound off the bells of victory.
As someone with no son of his own body, he considered Robert a son. Even though a bit unruly at times, he loved Robert dearly, Now Ned was the favored student, someone that he could be proud of by simple virtue of Ned's existence. There is no greater student he could ask for when it comes to passing on the chivalry and honor born out of an oath-bound knight. In this regard, he considered himself blessed to have Ned as a ward. Many of his fellow lords were not so sure of taking a Stark as a ward, but Jon had paid them no heed. There were past misdeeds from both House Stark and House Arryn, but the past should not dictate the terms of the future. He befriended Rickard Stark on the battlefield. Bonds that are forged in steel and blood are not so easily eroded. Because of a darker history, neither he nor Rickard barely remembers. Clinging to the past made the Targaryens weak and arrogant. If there ever was a better example, then the fall of the dragons would be the one, Jon thought. Aerys Targaryen forgot he depended on the support of the Lords of the Realm. It was this ignorance that led to the fall of the Targaryen dynasty. Thankfully, this was not the case for Robert. Jon was more than aware of the vices of his favored ward and king. Robert was brash, loud, a womanizer, a squanderer, and least bit interested in ruling as it is, but Robert made up for all of that by having one powerful quality that attracted friends and foes alike. Robert's ability to befriend someone was uncanny. He knew how to handle the Lords of the Realm very well and pull them in by his natural charisma and boisterous personality. With the recent victory over the Ironborn, Robert has ensured the remaining Targaryen loyalists will keep their heads down for the foreseeable future. Now, his work was just beginning, not just to oversee the matters of the realm, but also to undermine the Targaryen loyalists. Only a fool would say there will be no more conflicts. The Martells and Dorne is lying in wait for the right time to sink their poisoned fangs into the Baratheon dynasty. He was more than aware that the Dornish are not going to forget what happened to their princess when the Lannisters sacked the capital. Nonetheless, he was not going to lift a finger to punish Tywin. Mostly because it would only weaken the Iron Throne in the long run. Tywin remained one of the important pillars that grants power and legitimacy to the Iron Throne. If Jon was to throw that all away by moving against the Old Lion, he'd only make it easy for the Targaryen loyalists to undermine the Baratheon dynasty. Besides, he didn't see any of these honorable lords lift a finger when his kin suffered unjust death at the hands of the Mad King. Let those hypocrites grumble all they want. The Baratheons were here to stay and rule, and if he had to partner with Tywin Lannister to accomplish this task, he will. The Seven Kingdoms can ill afford the madness and stupidity that plagued the Targaryen dynasty for so long. It was time for the reign of dragons to be sidelined to the history books once and for all. The work for this was already underway, and once Robert returned from the north, he could start in earnest to pull the Reach into the fold. His plan to have the marriage of Stannis as a threat to the Tyrells was nearly thrashed with the stunt Robert pulled. Thankfully, the Florents were not offended, and now the axe was hanging over the Tyrells. It was now Lord Tyrell's move, and Jon waited patiently how Mace Tyrell would react. The recent incident with Lord Tyrell's heir and Oberyn Martell was just a blessing from the Seven. He'd be an idiot to not use the opportunity to widen the fissure that was surely forming between the Tyrells and Martells. My lord, hand. Jon turned around, facing Maester Pycelle, who was slowly climbing up the stairs. Grand Maester, I hope the morning suits you well. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed, my lord. Even in my old age, I am blessed enough to enjoy these summer days. Another winter is gone, and I thank the Seven to be among the living, said Pycelle, wheezing out the words, tiredly from climbing the flight of stairs. Jon secretly detested the Grand Maester for these word plays. While he appreciated the man's insight could bring, he also remained cautious of Pycelle's proclivity to side with the Lannister cause. He was not blind to the Queen's attempts to fill the court with her kin, and Pycelle was quite supportive of the Queen's endeavors. He just wondered how Lord Lannister managed to own Pycelle. Perhaps he ought to look into Pycelle's past more keenly. Is there anything important that requires my attention, Maester? Jon asked, seeing as Pycelle was not budging from his spot. Yes. Forgive me, my lord. Sometimes I forget myself. Jon just nodded with a polite smile. Of course, he knew Pycelle was merely putting on the act of being tired and old. Take your time, Grandmaster. Yes. A raven from Lord Tywin arrived, my lord. Now that piqued his interest. What the Lord of Westerlands want from him? Accepting the parchment from Pycelle, he traced his eyes over the contents. It seems Lord Tywin is hosting a tourney to celebrate the king's victory over the Ironborn. He offers quite a sum for the victor in the lists, said Jon, gathering his thoughts on holding a tourney at Casterly Rock. He had plans to hold celebrations in the capital. He was sure Robert would have loved the idea, not to mention he could gather the lords of the Seven Kingdoms under the auspices of the Iron Throne. No matter. I'll have to arrange for a separate tourney in the capital lest the lords think this war to be the victory of House Lannister. Politics remained a dreadful business, and he detested the games he had to play to secure the Baratheon dynasty's future. Yet he was forced to play this game of words for the sake of peace in the realm. He longed to see the days when he could retire back to the Eyrie and forget about the woes of the kingdoms. But first, he must ensure peace is properly restored and Robert's hold over the kingdoms remains strong. "Any word from Robert Grandmaster?" he inquired. The last he heard from his former ward, Robert was enjoying the hospitality of House Ryswell. From the Raven the Meister of the Rills sent, Robert was quite taken with the wild forests of the north and was hunting all sorts of game available beyond the neck. While he'd not have advised Robert to take a royal progress across the vast north right after the war, he was nonetheless not opposed to his decision. The North has proved time and time again to be a crucial ally to have in some of the most critical wars fought on Westerosi soil. The dance and the rebellion came to his mind. The Targaryens foolishly never rewarded their northern subjects despite being the least troublesome kingdom of the Seven Kingdoms. Even at the lowest points of Targaryen power, not a single lord of the North ever rebelled against the Iron Throne. In the rebellion, if not for the armies of the North, they'd have not crushed the royal army, as they did. The sturdy Northmen held the lines at the Trident, allowing the finest knights of the Vale to cut through the loyalists. So, Robert visiting Winterfell seems a pertinent decision. Robert would become the second king of the Iron Throne to visit the North right after Jaehaerys Targaryen. However, Robert's visit held an ulterior motive. Jon was of two minds of the rumors spreading about Ned's second son. He was just as curious about the truth of the matter. The claims were frankly far-fetched, in his opinion, but he'd keep an open mind for Ned's sake. If the rumors proved to be true, then Jon would actually be quite happy. Having a strong and prosperous North actually made his work that much easier. He needed the North Riverlands, Vale, Crownlands, and Stormlands to be as strong as possible. With the original Alliance member kingdoms growing in strength, Robert's reign will not be threatened again so easily. If Haryon Stark can indeed replicate Valyrian steel, then it was another blow to the supposed House of Dragons. It would prove that the Targaryens were not so special after all. Without their dragons, they were not worth the respect and fear Aegon the Conqueror instilled on Westeros. He'd eagerly await Robert's Raven from Winterfell. A warhammer made of Valyrian steel is another cause for celebration. It would be a weapon worthy of a king, not to mention one of the most unique weapons made of Valyrian steel. The prestige alone would be a crowning moment for the new Baratheon dynasty. And perhaps if the Seven smiled upon his house, he could commission a sword worthy of House Arryn from Ned's son. It was something to look forward to. Letting out a sigh, Jon took his leave to the Tower of Hand. If the realm is to prosper, much work has to be done, and he was not one to shirk his duty. The North. The land of the heathen, Septon's back home, called this land, the oldest and largest of the Seven Kingdoms. To Robert, this was not just the ancient land where the first men called their home. It was the land where his true love slept after being desecrated by the accursed dragon. Each night in his dreams, he kills Rhaegar over and over, yet his thirst for vengeance remained unquenched. Perhaps it never will. Robert thought as he rode his horse through Wintertown. Robert looked over the neutral faces of the small folk. There were no trumpets or flowers to greet him. No hoorays or drums sounded from the gathered people. He could only see silent judgment shining in their eyes. "The Northerners don't much trust outsiders," said Eddard, riding beside him on a horse. "I wouldn't have been an outsider if it wasn't for Rhaegar. We would have been family," Robert said, a faraway look in his eyes. "Rhaegar lies beneath the ground by your hands. Justice was done for my sister and my father and brother," said Eddard. "Not enough, Ned. I kill him over and over in my dreams. It is never enough. For what he did to Lyanna and your family, it's never enough." Robert growled, his fingers closing in to make a fist. He gritted his teeth as rage surged within him. "Lord Stark, forgive me if this offends you. I couldn't help but notice the 5-pointed star drawn on each of the houses. What's with that? Asked Sherbistan. That's when Robert also took note of the strangely shaped star drawn on many of the houses. Some had it painted on their doors, some has it drawn on their stone walls, while some houses have the star carved into stone and wood. There were even some banners of the, hanging from trees up ahead. It was truly surreal.
I'm as baffled as you, sir, said Eddard, looking around, noticing the changes that have undergone.
Robert heard Ned charge Jory Castle to find the verity of the matter. He eyed the Valyrian steel sword fastened on Jory's hip. The young man earned the right to wield the blade as he had seen Jory Castle's bravery in defending his friend during the siege of Pike. Although Eddard did explain the sword was merely loaned to Jory for the duration of the war. It is quite an honor to wield a Valyrian steel blade, but Robert felt the man deserved a good reward. This was why he personally knighted Jory Castle and Jorah Mormont. Both of them showed valor and skill during the siege, and that's why he knighted them both. As the trees and other obstructive constructs of the town escaped his line of sight, Robert finally gazed upon the towering castle of Winterfell in the distance. There was a misty tint to the air, and a bit of fog clung to the castle, but his eyes showed the mighty castle true. It is massive, just as you described, said Robert to Ned, who smiled upon setting his eyes on his childhood home. Welcome to Winterfell, your grace, said Eddard. Robert smiled. Took him nearly 7 years, but finally he was at the resting place of his Lyanna. Catelyn kept her composure as she watched the banners of House Stark and the king moving into the courtyard. She would have preferred to see her husband, who was away at war for nearly a year, immediately, but the king's presence complicated the situation. It'd be disrespectful towards the king if she were to behave in such a manner. Proper decorum has to be followed after all. So even though she had her eyes all over her husband searching for any signs of ailment, she still went to her knee once the king dismounted his horse. She had to force Harryen down as her troublesome son still thought it acceptable to stay on his feet. Thankfully, her son didn't open his mouth to say something highly contentious right at the moment, and instead knelt. She sent out a prayer to the mother for this small mercy. The last thing she wanted was for the king to get offended. She didn't have to worry about Robb or Sansa. Robb took her advice to the heart, showing proper respect to the king. He was, after all, going to be the Lord of Winterfell one day. Thankfully, Robb was the least troublesome of her children, and he had sportingly agreed to watch over Sansa, who was increasingly taking after her rebellious older brother. She'd have a word with her husband about the issue regarding these new banners coming up everywhere. The castle and Wintertown were getting filled with this new symbol, which her son called the pentagram. She can see the symbol almost everywhere she looked. Sansa was the one to draw the symbol all across the castle walls, and from there, the small folk took it upon themselves. Now, the small folk thinks this pentagram is a symbol of the old god's favor. She was truly afraid of what the lords of the north would think. Quite a few of the lords were accompanying the king and her husband. Some others were staying in the castle, and so far they have kept mum about the matter, if only to not offend her. Mayhaps her hasty execution of Septim Ordain has given her an intimidating reputation among the lords, as suggested by Maester Luwin. Maybe that's why the lords were keeping their opinion to themselves. Rise, all of you, ordered the king. Catelyn took to her feet, and so did the others. Even so, she maintained a tight grip on Harryen's shoulder. She only released it when she was sure her husband remained unscathed from the war. It was truly a blessing, and she thanked the seven for this mercy. Your grace, Winterfell is yours, she said, performing a perfect curtsy. Ah, Cat! The king embraced her as if she was his own sister. By the stories Ned has told her, King Robert would treat her as such, seeing as her husband remained brother in all but blood to the king. Coming out of the embrace, the king turned his attention to her children. And these must be your children, the king commented, and taking a good look at her 3 children. Then the king moved towards her eldest son. Red hair and blue eyes like your mother. You must be Robb, said King Robert before shaking her eldest's hand. Little Sansa Stark, you will grow to be a beauty like your mother, and all the lords will vie for your hand in marriage, the king complimented before moving on to her second son, Harryen. Black hair and gray eyes, eh? You must be Harryen Stark, the famed blacksmith. I shall look forward to your work, young Stark. By the grace of 7, her son silently accepted the compliment and shook hands with the king. It was a relief to her that Harryen didn't snap back any offensive comments to the king. Well then, Ned, take me to your crypts. I will have to pay my respects, said the king. Catelyn took note of the sad look flashing in the king's bright blue eyes. It has been 7 years, and the king has a beautiful wife and an heir. Yet King Robert still pines after good sister. She had, of course, known King Robert loved Lyanna Stark very much, but not to this extent. Is this how Ned thinks of the bastard's mother? She wondered, as her husband led the king towards the crypts. The thought blindsided her for a moment, and she couldn't help but throw a resentful look at Jon Snow, despite her best efforts to control herself. The bastard was standing far back behind the lords and other household guards. She knew the boy was hardly responsible for her husband's infidelity, but Jon Snow remained the living memory of her shame. No matter how much she tried, she could not entertain the thought of another woman sharing Ned's bed. Perhaps she wouldn't have felt this deeply if she hadn't fallen in love with her husband. She also knew her husband loved her, but her worry has always been whether Ned loved Jon Snow's mother more than her. After all, Catelyn was a political marriage for Ned, while the other woman must have taken her place in Ned's heart. When she saw Jon Snow looking in her direction, she put those dark thoughts away. There were far more important matters to deal with rather than wallowing in depressing thoughts. Family, duty, and honor, she whispered in her mind to settle herself. It was time to do her duty as Lady of Winterfell and welcome the many guests accompanying the king and her husband. At least that should take her mind off her woes. A gentle breeze glid into their home through the open window. The cool breeze flowed over him, carrying a lemon tint. Looking outside the window, Viserys took note of the large lemon tree with its leaves dancing in the wind. This was a sad day for Viserys. Truth be told, he has not known happy days ever since his mother, Rhaella Targaryen, the true queen of the Seven Kingdoms, passed away. He is the last male Targaryen, and only his sister shared his name and blood, a sister he despised for robbing his mother's life. It has been hard to live in exile. Each day, he lived in fear of usurpers' dogs, not just for his life, but he had to worry about his sister's life as well. Even though he blamed Dany for his mother's death, he could not help but worry for her. Dany was his sister, his blood. He could hate her and love her, but no one else was allowed to harm her. He would not allow that so long as he was alive. He is a Targaryen, the blood of the dragon. No one harms his family. He burned them all as Argon the Conqueror did. The giggling of his little sister Burrow, a smile to his face. He watched from the window as his sweet sister ran around the lemon tree, chasing after a small puppy. The small animal was a stray that walked into their home on a rainy night. His sweet sister immediately took a shine to the creature, and ever since then, the puppy remained under her care. He didn't have the heart to deny his sister the companionship of the creature, especially when it reminded him so much of his niece, Rhaenys, who had a pet cat named Belerion. He remembered the cat well. His niece thought of her cat as the Black Dread and reenacted Aegon's battles while running around the Red Keep. The Red Keep. Viserys could hardly remember the intricacies of the seat of power of Targaryen kings. He knew it was made of red bricks and it has numerous chambers, but living in exile for over 6 years was sapping away the memories of his home. He may have forgotten some chambers and layout of the Red Keep, but he'd never forget, nor will he forgive the savagery unleashed by the usurper and his dogs upon his family. It is said his niece was stabbed 100 times by Tywin Lannister's mad dogs. His nephew Aegon had his head smashed, and his good sister was raped to death. The only reason he and his mother escaped the blades of the usurper's dogs was that they were safe in Dragonstone. But even the ancient seat of his family proved to be unsafe after his father was struck down by the false knight, Jaime Lannister. The castle of Dragonstone was crawling with spies and traitors, hoping to garner goodwill with the usurper. If it wasn't for Sir Willem Darry, he'd have also died at the hands of the traitors. But Sir Willem was a true knight and did his duty by serving his rightful king dutifully all his life. As such, it was painful for Viserys to watch the good knight waste away in the bed. He looked at the weakened form of Sir Willem and barely held back the tears waiting to spill out. The knight was not just his trainer and teacher, but also a confidant. The knight was someone he could speak openly with, and someone he admired. It was the last wish of his mother that he learned from the man and listened to Sir Willem's advice. A wish that he took to heart, and so far the knight kept him and his little sister safe. For this, he would remain immensely grateful. Viserys dearly wished he could reward the knight with something, but he was rich no longer. The riches in gold and land were no longer his to give. The usurper has seen to that with his treachery. He is the prince of the Seven Kingdoms. yet he possessed very little wealth to his name. His inability to provide some comfort to the knight who saved him and his sister from a gruesome death weighed heavily in his mind. He felt as if the whole world was mocking him and his ancestors, looking upon him with shame from the heavens. He was reminded of the fact that he is currently the same age as Daeron, who had launched the conquest of Doran at the ripe age of 4 and 10. When the young dragon turned 5 and 10, King Daeron became the youngest Targaryen to win a war. Daeron succeeded where even the conqueror and his sister wives failed. Viserys looked upon the young dragon for inspiration. One day he would emulate the young dragon and take what was taken from his house through war. Yet time was passing by, and he could not see a clear path to the Iron Throne. The Ironborn rebellion in Westeros had given him hope. Surely the lords would see the usurper to be a weak fool and raise their banners to restore House Targaryen to the Iron Throne. At least it's what he hoped when the Greyjoys launched their rebellion. He hoped they were the first of many, and he had laughed so heartily when word reached him of the burning of Lannister fleet. He waited day and night without sleep for any scrap of information from Westeros. He dreamed of the Targaryen banner proudly raised over the highest towers of the Red Keep. He saw himself seated on the Iron Throne, the seat of power his ancestors forged through fire and blood. He dreamed of a massive armada that'd sail into the Blackwater Bay, the same armada that burned the coasts of the traitorous kingdoms like the North Riverlands, Vale, Stormlands, and Westerlands. Yet nothing of the sort happened. The accursed usurper managed to crush the rebellion. No lords raised their banners to restore him to his rightful throne. No ships came to Essos to sail him home. All his dreams remained dreams, while the usurper and his dogs celebrate their victory. Why? He screamed in his mind. Why is the usurper winning? Why are the gods not answering my prayers? Why are the lords refusing to welcome their rightful king?
Your Grace. A raspy voice called him.
Viserys broke off from his depressive thoughts to see the tired gray eyes of Ser Willem being trained on him. He doubted Ser Willem could even properly see him. The poor man is half blind, and yet he remains staunchly loyal to my house, a knight worthy of the White Cloak. Viserys thought. The old wrinkly hands of Ser Willem beckoned him, and Viserys moved closer to the old knight's reach. The hands of Ser Willem were shaking, and so he took those hands into his... Have you completed your training in the yard, Your Grace? The gruff voice of Sir Willem came out, accompanied by a series of coughs. I have, sure. Good. Good. Willem rasped. Do not let your skills with the blade dull. You will need it when you retake the Iron Throne from the usurper. I will train twice as hard, Viserys promised, eyes glistering with tears. Ser Willem smiled, showing the few teeth the knight has left in his mouth. It will not be easy, taking the Iron Throne, but I'm confident you will take back the Iron Throne. There are allies hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ser Willem rasped out. Viserys struggled to hear what Ser Willem was saying. Before he could ask for clarification, his sister chose that moment to barge into the room. Thankfully, her pet dog was nowhere to be seen. Princess, Ser Willem fondly called as Dany skipped next to Ser Willem's bed. His sister was another reason to be thankful to Ser Willem. Dany grew up without knowing her father and mother. The only Targaryen she knew was him. She saw Ser Willem as a father figure, a sentiment shared by Ser Willem, who treated Dany as if she was his own daughter. Viserys knew his sister was a sweet little thing, but every time he looked at her, he saw the dead eyes of his mother lying in a pool of blood. No matter how hard he tried, he could not forget the light leaving his mother's eyes. The anguish he felt that night on the ship as they sailed away from their home was overwhelming. The helplessness he felt that night still clung to him, and it made him unable to properly care for his sister. So he always kept her at an arm's length, fearing what he might do to her in a moment of weakness. Tell me a story, sir. A story about home. Daenerys asked sweetly. Ser Willem is ill, Dany, said Viserys, looking sternly at his sister. But Viserys gave his sister a frosty look that made her flinch and shut up, seeing the fear on his sister's face. He calmed down. Ser Willem needs his rest. I will tell you the tale of Aemon the Dragon Knight after we pray in the sept for Ser Willem's health. Viserys offered as a compromise, The radiant smile that graced his sister's face lightened his heart. That evening, Viserys took his sister to the Septus. The proximity of Braavosi coastlands to the Andal heartlands ensured there were small septs scattered throughout the land. While these septs had nothing compared to the great sept of Baelor, they gave him a sense of belonging and familiarity. Of course, they could not afford to expose their identity. So Viserys had turbans wrapped around his head, as well as his sisters, to keep their silver hair shielded from curious eyes. After saying their prayers, they walked back to their home. It disturbed him to pray to a small stone sculpture. The lack of gemstones for eyes in the Septon Seven sculptures also made it difficult for him to pray. In King's Landing, it was believed the gemstones were the eyes of the seven through which the gods judged those who pray in the sept. Maybe that's why his prayers remain unanswered while the usurper ruled from the Iron Throne without trouble. Once they neared their home, Viserys frowned, as the servants were arguing outside the door. Sarvalum had purchased their home near an isolated farmland. Even so, he was strict to keep discipline in the house, hiding from any sort of attention. "What's happening?" he wondered, feeling a sense of impending doom. Viserys tightened the grip on Dany's hand and slowly made his way forward. Once the servants saw him, they quieted down, but he remained wary of these servants. He could feel many eyes on his person, and without a sword by his side, he felt exposed. He dragged Daenerys with him and rushed into their home. It didn't take long for Viserys to find Sir Willem, who had passed away, in his bed. He didn't know how long, but he stared at the knight who had taken care of him and his sister all these years. Daenerys was openly crying, but Viserys could not afford to show such weakness. However, despite his best efforts, a single tear rolled down his cheeks. He might be a dragon, but even dragons have a heart. Bowing his head, he discreetly rubbed that stray tear away, even as his heart drowned in anguish. "Now I'm truly alone." Harry should have known children are a strange breed. They are easily distracted and have the extraordinary ability to misinterpret something in ways that flummox an adult's mind. He should have remembered this simple fact before he unwittingly involved his siblings in the ritual. "Maybe this body is inhibiting my mind far more than I thought," Harry reasoned within his mind as he watched iron beginning to melt in the melting pot. It is possible that his mental faculties were not up to par, just as his magic remained weakened compared to his older self. The Department of Mysteries had long since realized magic in a wizard and a witch remains intrinsically tied to their brains. This is true for all magical creatures. It is the reason why they were able to reshape reality to their imagination. The brain is the centerpiece of magical ability, and that's why the mind arts was such a difficult branch of magic to master. Now, Harry's situation was a difficult one to comprehend. His present situation is beyond the edge of reason, and quite frankly beyond the scope of magic. Reincarnating into a different planet after walking through the veil of death is not exactly covered under any branch of magic he knew of, not to mention the biological constraints must be making him more volatile emotionally and mentally. After all, he stepped into the veil convinced he was going to die, and yet he was alive on another planet. In some ways, his mind might be affected by his experience of death and rebirth. How else could he explain his poor judgment by letting children witness a ritual that required blood sacrifice? This thought was just burning inside his mind, and he felt like he was in a melting pot. No matter how much experience he had gathered, it seems the biological impulses of this young body are strong enough to overwhelm his otherwise accumulated wisdom and rationale. I need to increase the practicing time of occlumency techniques, Harry thought. Setting that aside for the moment, Harry focused on the work at hand. The king was away from the castle with his father. The two of them, accompanied by a slew of lords and knights, had gone out for a hunt in the Wolf's Wood. It was a good thing the king was taking so much of his father's attention. It means he has got more time to work out how to properly deal with the mess Sansa made. Although Harry was not exactly sure whether it'd become a mess. The pentagram was well received in Winterfell as well as in Wintertown. It's possible that the Northern Lords may not find the symbol offensive. It's hard to say, seeing as they are all hard men to read. Legmancy would have yielded some results, but he was suitably cautious in using that branch of the mind arts, especially when he was this vulnerable. A child's brain is not suitable for this kind of offensive mind art. Either way, he decided to roll with punches and was going forward with the pentagram. So if you don't mind me asking, just how do you keep the steel from forming slags if you are casting the hammer as bronze weapons were made in the past? Harry shifted his attention to Tyrion Lannister, a funny man who happened to be the brother of the most feared lord in the South. House Lannister is an old house, as old as House Stark. They could trace their ancestry all the way to the Age of Heroes. They blazon their cloaks and banners with a golden lion. The Lannisters are also the richest house in the Seven Kingdoms. Most of all, the current queen is a Lannister, and that puts them in a powerful position. By this man's presence in the forge, Harry deduced one thing. House Lannister is interested in commissioning a sword, a welcoming prospect, in Harry's opinion. If he somehow has caused any offense to the Northern Lords, then some gold might come in handy to smooth over some ruffled feathers. Have a spell to sustain the temperature in the iron so that the metal remains in a molten state, Harry answered before gesturing for his assistants to take the melting pot away from the fire. Huh, interesting. Tell me, how are you doing these spells? Asked Tyrion Lannister, eyes shining with unbridled curiosity. That's a difficult question to answer, Lord Tyrion. How does your stomach digest the food you eat, the wine you drink? How does your heart pump blood without your conscious decision? Even when you sleep, the faculties of your body function without your express permission, said Harry, applying a spell to cushion the flow of the molten metal as his assistants began pouring the metal into the mold through the sprue hole. Smoke billowed out of the vents as the molten metal began to settle into the mold. As the molten metal slowly filled up the mold, Harry began casting the forging spells with the Elder Wand. The forging spells emulated the folding techniques that refined the metal layer by layer, while imbuing it with magical properties. Just as there are chain spells dedicated for defense and offense, there are chain spells for enchanting charms. Harry created a chain of charms dedicated to replicating the everlasting properties of Valyrian steel. Each layer of the metal gets threaded together by this chain of charms, thereby keeping an everlasting cohesion. Now, all these spells were in danger of getting eroded, and that's where the runes come in. So these spells, magic is something within the human body. The Lannister Lord prodded. Magic is an energy prevalent in nature, Lord Tyrion. It resides in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the creatures that we share this world with, and even in our bodies. Everyone has magic in them, but only a rare few souls can wield magic. That's the only difference, said Harry, without taking his eyes off the mold. There was some soft murmur in the far back of the forge. Harry placed the identity of those people by their distinctive Braavosi accent. For some reason, the two Braavosi merchants were hanging around Lord Manderley like bears who found a honeypot. It's easy to say they are quite interested in his magic, going by the thorough inquiries they conducted yesterday. Mostly they wanted to know if there were any sacrifices involved to fuel up the spells. He was curious how these Braavosi came to this conclusion. Knowing the history of Braavos, Harry had a strong suspicion the Valyrians charged up their spells using sacrificial magic. Maybe that's what got the Braavosi spooked. But this was another problem to worry about some other time. At the moment, there were better things to worry about. After ensuring the layers were properly tethered by magical spells, he applied the cooling charm on the molten metal, ensuring instant solidification. With the process complete, he nodded at his assistants. They removed the top flask, and Harry laid eyes on his handiwork. The hammer was 36 inches long, but it was currently covered in sand. A simple flick of his wand cleaned all the dirt, and the smooth surface of the hammer was revealed to everyone. The hammer was black as night, except for the golden pentagram Harry impressed upon the center of the hammerhead. He tapped the hammer with the tip of his wand. The runes, ensuring the integrity of the spells, flared up with a golden hue before disappearing altogether. Well, I believe King Robert's weapon is ready. Eddard liked to think he is a simple man with simple tastes in life. He was never attracted to the extravagance that came with his position as a son of House Stark. Oh, he knew he was afforded many comforts an average northerner could only dream of. He was born in a warm, sturdy castle, one of the largest in the Seven Kingdoms. He was blessed with a lovely family, a lovely wife, beautiful children, and the necessary wealth to lead a healthy as well as peaceful life. What more could a man ask for in this world? Holding his newborn daughter in his arms, he was once again reminded of how fortunate he was. His daughter's eyes were a deep shade of gray, and hair as black as night. A Stark in looks and name.
She has Leia's eyes, said Benjen softly, scratching the underside of the newborn's feet, which made her snuggle into Ned's arms. I know, said Ned, looking longingly at the gray eyes of his newborn daughter, a mirror to his beloved sister's eyes. Have you thought of a name, Cat? Asked Benjen. Eddard also looked at his wife, curious to see if his wife has any suggestions. I'm afraid not, Benjen. My husband was too busy entertaining his friend for the past week rather than thinking of a name for our daughter. Benjen cracked up beside him, making Ned frown. He got the feeling Benjen was about to make fun of him, a favorite pastime of his younger sibling. Lyanna would often say that Robert was only interested in her because he pictures her as Eddard with long hair and teats. If the laws would have allowed him, Robert would have married my brother instead of his Lannister wife. Benjen joked, before dissolving into peals of laughter. Even Kat joined Benjen in laughter at Ned's expense. A feeling that he didn't like at all. Mostly cause it reminded him of his childhood when Brandon, Lyanna, and Benjen made fun of him. You come down from the wall once a year, only to insult me in front of my wife. It seems even the wall has failed to temper your character. Ned groused. Surely the Lord of Winterfell and the Warden of the North can appreciate a joke once a year, Benjen jabbed, sharing a smile with his good sister. Only if your jokes are not at my or the king's expense, especially when the Lord of all 7 kingdoms is a guest in our home. Wars have been started for less, Ned cautioned, his mind going back to thoughts of an elder brother who brazenly offended powerful people on a fairly regular basis, a habit their father had tried to curb, but failed. You have no sense of humor, brother. Now, let's see whether my niece has more humor than my dour sibling, said Benjen, carefully taking the baby into his arms. Ned saw his daughter let out a small yawn, which put a smile on his face. He watched Benjen pace around the room, making cooing sounds and funny faces at his daughter. Seeing this, Ned shook his head. His brother has always been excited when it comes to babies, and yet he chose the wall. In an ideal world, Benjen should have married a good northern lady and had started a family of his own. Ned had planned to raise a castle at Sea Dragon Point and assign Benjen the lordship of the land. A marriage to House Mormont or Tallheart would have helped his little brother govern the long strip of land most ably. Instead, his younger brother chose to take the black. It was a decision he didn't approve, but Benjen was adamant to become a brother of the Night's Watch. The Watch may have fallen to decay at present, but many of the First Men houses still considered it an honorable service to their land. After all, the Night's Watch protected the North from wildling raiders. Ned took note when Benjen handed the baby to Catelyn before eyeing him with an uncharacteristic serious look on his face. Catelyn, would you excuse us for a moment? Catelyn eyed the two of them before she took her leave, closing the door behind her. How long does the king plan to stay here? Asked Benjen. I frankly do not know, Ned answered after brief thought. Why? What's the matter? Why else? Jon, Benjen whispered. Ned became alarmed. What about Jon? He asked, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead, and it had nothing to do with the warmth provided by the castle. You brought Sarbaristan Selmy and other people who knew Rhaegar as a child to our home. They could notice the similarities. I've kept Jon far away from any curious eyes, brother. Besides, Jon takes after us in looks. Ned reasoned. There are people here who have seen Rhaegar since childhood. It wouldn't be a stretch for them to note Jon has a similar skin tone and cheekbones. Just today, I had to carefully lead both Jon and Hyrien away before they garnered Sir Barristan's attention, said Benjen. Ned turned away from his brother to gaze out the window, his face thoughtful and overcome with fear for Jon's safety. Promise me, Ned. Promise me. Ned could still hear the voice of his sister's last words ring loud and clear in his ears. He could even smell the blood and roses of the room, which he found her in her last moments. Oh, how he wished he could save her that day. He had never felt so helpless and useless as he watched the light leave his sister's eyes. He cursed Rhaegar for what he did to his sister. The Targaryen prince ruined her life just as he ruined the lives of thousands. If Robert hadn't killed that madman... Ned! He heard Benjen call, which snapped Ned out of his musings. Ned, we need to move Jon away from Winterfell, at least until Robert and the others leave. You're right. It is dangerous for Jon to stay here. The risk is too great. But moving him abruptly may also raise suspicion. Ned thought out loud. Suddenly, he smashed his fist on a piece of furniture in frustration. I should have found some way to keep Robert away from Winterfell. As a matter of fact, I do have an idea that could see Jon quietly move from Winterfell without suspicion, said Benjen. Ned was pleasantly surprised to hear that. Truly, how? Harrion has been telling me about the spring sickness and his cure the other day. Ned frowned. He was hoping to have a talk with his son regarding that topic, but Robert's insistence on going for a hunt had made him postpone. I'm aware of it. What's that got to do with Jon? Asked Ned. Well, it turns out no one has found a cure for the sickness till Harrion. The medicine that was in excess after curing the people of Winterfell and Wintertown was sent to the White Harbor. However, it's not enough. Also, Braavos is dealing with a small outbreak as well, so the cure is being sought out by the Braavos. Harrion tells me that he needs unicorn horns to make more medicine. Ned looked at his brother as if he lost his mind, understanding where Benjen was going with this. Are you mad? You want to take... Yes. I want to take Harrion on a journey to Skagos, where we have the clans help us find the unicorns. Jon can be taken along for the journey, and no one would suspect a thing, said Benjen. You have clearly gone mad. I will not allow my children anywhere near that island full of barbarians. Besides, Harrion is needed here to present the king's weapon, Ned argued. They will be traveling with me, and written orders from you should be enough for the clans to ensure our safety. If you are that worried, said Benjen with a shrug. As for presenting the king's weapon, I think Robb can do that as the heir of Winterfell.
I don't know, Benjen. This comes off as a bad idea. Ned remained unconvinced.
I may not be as knowledgeable when it comes to Harrion, but do you really want him to address the king and the entire court? The lad spews out offenses every time he opens his mouth. He could have given a real challenge to Brandon. Well, there is that, but still, sending them to Skagos is a bit extreme, don't you think? No, there's no time to waste on overthinking everything. If you have a better idea to move Jon inconspicuously, then let me hear it. Ned had no answer to that, and so he agreed to Benjen's plan reluctantly. You better find a good name for your daughter to make your wife happy, 'cause she won't be pleased to learn her son is gonna Skagos. Benjen said as a parting shot, leaving Ned alone in the room. Careful, Master Harden. Harry cautioned the smith.
Worry not, young lord.
I have steady hands, said Master Harden, a young blacksmith whom Harry charged with a crucial task. Harry kept a keen eye on the liquid metal pouring into the mold. As the last drop was emptied into the mold by the steady hands of Master Harden, Harry began humming chants in Parseltongue. He flicked his wand, silently casting the summoning charm. A small cup flew into his waiting hand. Inside the cup lay powdered weirwood leaves treated with the sap from the heart tree. It was also thoroughly blessed by the unique magic of the resident druids of this planet, thanks to pollen. The powder was a strong mix, just oozing with nature, magic, or old magic as wizards of his world called it. Harry poured the powder into the mold. It quickly caught fire, but that wasn't the point. The magic contained in the powder seeped into the molten metal under the careful application of Parseltongue. After this was done, Harry used the spell-forging method to bind metal and magic together, layer by layer. A few minutes later, Harry observed Master Harden carefully removing the mold. And there it was, a perfectly strong magical foci in the form of a Valyrian steel ring, perfectly capable of performing magic and storing away his magical power. A magical battery of sorts. At first look, it looked like a gold ring with a small dragon head as a headpiece, but it was no ordinary ring. It was a ring filled with enormous power. Or at least it will be when I fill it with magical power. Harry mused. Harry took the ring into his left hand, flipping the ring on its side. He looked at the small pentagram on the inside surface of the ring. He pricked his finger to get a drop of blood and pressed the blood to the pentagram. The runes that run along the ring's surface lit up with magic, ensuring his sole ownership of the ring. Harry put the ring on his index finger. The ring was unsurprisingly a bit loose, but that was not an issue. The ring let out a small shiver before it shrunk down in size to fit his finger perfectly. Reaching out with his magic, Harry was relieved to find the ring welcomed his magic in. It felt like the first time he was holding his wand. There was a euphoric warmth that spread out from the tip of his fingers to all ends of his body. Nice, Harry said, looking at his new magical foci. The Elder Wand is undoubtedly a powerful magical foci, but it was certainly not having a good time in this world. The Elder Wand's greatest advantage is that it holds impressions of powerful wizards from ages past. So any spell he performs using the wand gets a boost from these age-old impressions gathered by the Death Stick. However, the magic drain happening in this world has the potential to wipe the slate clean, so to speak, and leave the Elder Wand as just an ordinary wand. So an idea came to him to make a new magical foci. Hence the ring. Of course, using magic rings is not exactly a new idea. Ancient Aryan wizards used spell-forged rings as conduits for spells, although rings are not exactly preferred for sophisticated magic. They were best used for wide area affecting spells. There you are, nephew. Harry stopped admiring his new magical foci in favor of looking at his uncle, Benjen Stark. "Ah, I was hoping to find you," said Harry, nodding at Master Harden to present the gift he had prepared for his uncle. The young blacksmith picked up a wooden box from a nearby table and presented it to Benjen. "What's in here?" Opening the box, Ben was left speechless, as his eyes took in a beautifully casted longsword having distinct ripple patterns all over the blade's surface. "You made this for me?" Ben asked, taking the blade out of the case and appreciating it with a few swings. "I know you just had your 22nd name's day. Consider this a gift," said Harry. "Have I ever told you just how weird you talk?" "No 6-year-old talks like you do," said Benjen, still marveling at his new sword. "There are no 6-year-olds like me," said Harry, shrugging his shoulders. "I've noticed," Benjen said, sardonically. "Well, this is a fine gift, Harry. In fact, I have a gift of sorts for you as well." "Oh! I'm curious to see what you have for me, Uncle Benjen." Benjen gave him a crooked smile. "How do you feel about a trip to find some unicorns in Skagos?" Harry stared at his uncle to see whether the man was joking. Seeing as that is not the case, a smile blossomed on Harry's face. "When do we leave?" he asked eagerly. "Now," said Benjen, before picking Harry up in a scoop despite his protests, before leaving the smoke-filled shop of the smith. The next half an hour was sort of a blur for Harry. He was quite confused at the pace by which everything was happening, but he was not complaining. A trip to the secluded island of Skagos, where he could examine unicorns and other magical beasts of this planet, is the most exciting thing that's ever been about to happen in the last 6 years. So he was very happy to start this journey. The downside, however... "You all right, Harryan?" asked the newly knighted Jory Castle. Harry was sitting on Jory's horse with the newly appointed knight holding the reins. In his excitement about the journey, he had almost forgotten just how slow the journey was going to be. This would not be an easy journey where he could cut out travel time with port keys, brooms, and apparition. "Can I at least have my own horse?" Harry whined. "Not possible, nephew. As it is, your mother is just about ready to eat me alive. So, count yourself lucky you are even having this journey," said Benjen, who was holding Jon close to his chest on his horse. Benjen and Jon took the lead while Jory and Harry followed them. 10 guards accompanied them on horses and they were out of the north gate before long. Harry watched the castle disappear behind him with his father and mother looking at them from the distance. He couldn't help but wonder why they'd agree to let him go. Either way, he was quite happy. He does not have to present the Warhammer to the king. He was hardly one for ceremonies, and his father plans to hand over the weapon to the king in a formal setting. That kind of thing was reserved for Robb, as he is the heir to the seat of Winterfell. However, Harry was the one to make the weapon, so it is his prerogative to put a price on it. He just hoped Robb is successful in presenting the price he was asking for the weapon to the king. Moreover, he hoped the king would oblige, especially after the trouble he went through to add some extra spells on the weapon. "I suppose I'll find out if everything went according to plan when I return," Harry mused, looking towards the road ahead.